everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am Brian Weinstein, your host. My guest today is a former teacher and a current poet and author. She is Elizabeth Beck, the author of Summer Tour, a coming-of-age fictional novel about a boy who visits his cousins and learns how to connect with people through the community of fish. Elizabeth is a longtime Deadhead and Fish fan, and in today's episode, we talk about her summer touring with the Grateful Dead in the 80s, how she first got into Fish in the 90s, her influences as a writer, how she connected with the literary community in Lexington, Kentucky, and most importantly for today's episode, how New Year's Eve 2019 helped provide her with the end of her novel. I came across the cover of Summer Tour on a Fish Facebook group, I think it was. And when I looked into it, I read the first 5 chapters on Amazon for a free preview, and I was bought in hook, line, and sinker. I'm an English teacher in my daytime, so when I read this, that there was a big-time Fish fan who was an excellent writer and also wrote a coming-of-age novel that kind of blended together my two favorite things, fish and literature, I knew that I had to talk to her. When I spoke to Elizabeth and she accepted my invitation to come on Attendance Bias and she chose New Year's Eve 2019, I knew it would be a very good conversation. We would have a lot in common, and especially the fact that the show was so recent, the memories were fresh and the theories were popping. So thank you again to Elizabeth, and enjoy our conversation about New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2019. Send in the clones. Elizabeth, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today. This is awesome.
And I'm really excited to not only talk about today's show, which I have a feeling for many of our listeners is going to be their most recent one attended, but also to hear about Summer Tour, and not the actual fish shows, but your book that we're going to talk about. I'm an English teacher, and you are a recently retired English teacher. I have that right?
Yep, you do.
So always book talks are in my wheelhouse, and especially the type of book that you wrote, which is right on point for, I think, a lot of high school kids and middle school age students. But you could talk more about that in a minute. Before we get to Summer Tour or New Year's Eve 2019, I'd like to hear a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Brian.
Sure.
I grew up in Ohio, and I spent 15 years in Cincinnati, Ohio. I went to the University of Cincinnati as an art major at DAAP. I have a degree in English literature, though, and a minor in painting. And I love the city so much. I love Clifton and my friends that I stayed there. And then I did graduate work at Xavier, and I taught in Cincinnati Public for many years. And about 15 years ago, my husband and I moved here to Lexington, Kentucky for his work. And we've raised our son, who is entering his sophomore year in college. Came back at home with us, which is a little daunting. We sent him to the dorms and, of course, had to pull him back out in March. But he's studying digitally. And I'm a writer, a teacher, and an artist.
And so in your bio, I think it was on Amazon, where it says that when she is not writing, Elizabeth is going to as many fish shows as possible.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yes. Originally, I'm a Deadhead. I started seeing Grateful Dead shows in 1986, the year I graduated high school, and absolutely fell in love with the culture and the band and embraced it fully. So in 1992, I was led to Fish. My first show was at Bogart's on Short Vine Street in Clifton. Really small venues. In the early 90s, it was predominantly a boy band. There weren't a lot of women in the scene. There were absolutely no Fish chicks yet. So musically, I started connecting with them because I also love classical jazz. So Coltrane, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, that's where I kind of lie. And that's what got me into Fish, was the jazz influence, the extemporaneous jamming. So stemming away from this gentle world of the Grateful Dead, it was a rough transition, but I've kind of stuck with it. And then actually, first husband and I broke up over the Nutter 97 show.
Really?
Yeah. We did. Yeah, that's my history, right?
And we'll get into maybe that story is for a different podcast, but
right.
but I want to know, because you're also a professional author, so for being such a huge head and now you're a retired teacher, where in between those two things did not summer tour, but how did your writing come about?
I have gone in and out of the career of teaching for several reasons. For example, when I met Forever Husband, I left Cincinnati Public because he landed a job in Fort Wayne, Indiana, then Rockford, Illinois, then Lexington, Kentucky. So we've moved around a lot. And in earnest, I took time off purposely and started studying poetry at the Carnegie Center in Lexington, Kentucky. There was a fantastic poetry series in town called Holler Poets. And it was at Owl's Bar, and that's where I found my community, my writers. Just this really rich community of art and literature here in Lexington. But, of course, we do house University of Kentucky. We are a college town. So, it's not so unusual. And that's when I started publishing my works of poetry. However, Summer Tour was written under the auspice of Gurney Norman, who is the author of a book called Divine Rights Trip. There was a group of Kentuckians in the 1960s who left Kentucky and went out to Palo Alto, California to hang out with those kids called the Warlocks. And
I think I've heard of them.
Yeah, right. And then a lot of them came back to Kentucky. So we have Ed McClanahan and Gurney Norman and Jim Hall and Bobby M. Mason, of course, were these group of hippies, who wrote about it and hung out with Ken Kesey and the pranksters and things like that. Anyway, I had to get my certification renewed about 6 or 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the Kentucky Department of Education said, just take an English class. We don't care. I said, can I take writing? And they said, yeah, we don't care. As long as it's a postgraduate level, class, just go. And so, yeah.
It's like a kid in a candy store for a writer.
I didn't have to take education classes, no PDs. So I studied with Gurney. In the first semester, I was with a bunch of graduate students and undergrads and kids, and it was a blast. And I started writing the novel. And so that summer, he said, listen, I'll put you on independent study so you can get your 3 credits to certify because you need to finish the book. Then I put the book in a drawer and I walked away.
As authors tend to do.
Yes. Yeah. I went back to teaching. My son was starting high school. And then when he left this fall for college, I knew I needed, since he's my only child, I needed a project. So I decided to pull the manuscript out of the drawer. Okay, so about a year ago, Robert Hunter died. And I was listening to the Grateful Dead channel. And this guy was on there, Peter Connors, author of Growing Up Dead, to talk about, Robert Hunter and Grateful Dead. And, I picked up my head. I was like, Growing Up Dead, what's that? So I ordered his book. And for me, it was just this incredible experience that happened when his is a memoir, but I read it and I read it in 24 hours. It was so engrossing, and it was about his experience of getting on tour with the Grateful Dead. 1986, same year I graduated from high school. We're the same age. And all of a sudden it hit me. I knew what to do with my manuscript. So I took a 45,000 word manuscript and deconstructed it and rewrote the entire thing and set it on Summer Tour 2019.
And so what is Summer Tour about?
It's a coming of age story about a group of kids who find community through their experience of traveling to, I think they see about 12 or 14 shows in the course of a few weeks is what they do together. And they come together as a community and find themselves in the process.
And you explained very clearly about how the touring part of the stories idea came to you, about finding your community. Where did the coming of age part come to you? Because coming of age stories are a very popular template always have been, always will be. There's always a group of 12 to 18-year-olds, wanting to
Right.
read and discover more and read, about themselves as reflected in other characters. And so why did you choose, or what brought you to choose that template to mix with the idea of going on tour?
That was first, and that existed.
Okay.
So I originally, when I was studying with Gurney, my son was in 7th or 8th grade and hated to read. And I said, well, what if I write a book about a high school kid? And I was very conscious of writing it scene-based. So I was conscious of this generation of kids who want to pick up a phone and like have it to them immediately. And so I got in, I hit it fast, got back out. In that manuscript, there was one like a mythological fish show at Deer Creek, which is my, spiritual place. And when I reconstructed it, the actual shows and the research and everything are completely authentic details. So that's
was it just like floating around in your head and you were maybe subconsciously picking details from your own experiences and mashing them together?
Oh, sure. But, this was August, September when I have this revelation. Oh, my God.
2019, you mean?
Of 2019. So they hadn't even gone to Dick's yet, right? I mean, so what I was doing then is just really looking at that summer and just setting it June of 2019. Sam Abernathy lands in a mythological town called Maywood, Ohio. There he meets these kids, and his first 2 shows are St. Louis. So I didn't go to the St. Louis shows. So I, streamed all the shows, listened to the shows, and then I went on to Fish Chicks, and they were extremely helpful. So I had a lot of fun. It was deep research. I even went so far as to measure out every mile, every interstate. I knew every KOA and RV site. I knew the restaurants. Everything was steeped in it because once I started rolling with this, I wanted to celebrate the whole community of fish. Of course, we're celebrating the band. That goes without saying.
Right.
But I wanted to use these specific details to capture this particular era.
I noticed something that you said just now that kind of reflected something you said a little bit earlier when you were talking about the community of writers that are in Cincinnati. I want to make sure I have that right.
Lexington.
In Lexington, I'm sorry.
Kentucky, yep.
Yeah. And then you're talking about now how a big goal of your book was to kind of acknowledge the entire fish community. Do you see like similarities between those two, even though maybe time-wise or with their goals or their interests, they might be very wide apart? But are there similarities just as far as the community goes and the looking out for one another?
When we writers used to get together for Holler, it was a monthly event. We all came. A whole group got together earlier and did editing with each other. We cheered each other on at the open mic when we were terrified. We would be feature readers there, which was a huge deal, and celebrated our book releases with each other. So absolutely, that was a very beautiful time. And it was also tied into the visual artists. John Lackey is one of my favorite painters here in town. Owns Homegrown Press. He's also a poet, so he would take the stage, and he did all of the posters. He actually, he did all the posters for Wilco. Are you hip to that band with Jeff Tweedy?
Yeah, I actually had tickets to see them this summer.
Right? I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, okay. So that's where I was. I had worked on it all fall. So I'm going to give you a little glimpse into this crazy teacher's fall schedule.
Okay.
My son's gone to college. So I wake up at, 7 a.m. like all the teachers to go and teach our 8-9 hours at school. I get home around 4:30, have dinner with my husband and go to sleep at between 9 or 10, because then I'd get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and I'd write. And then I go back to sleep at about 6 just for that 1 hour nap and get up and then do the whole thing all over again.
Wow.
And it wasn't like this. I don't want to sound like there was no discipline involved here, Brian. It was a passion thing. These characters, if you've met them yet, they are pushy. Whether I didn't want to write, they were knocking on my dreams.
Yeah.
And waking me up and telling me, hey, this is what happens at this show. And, you need to get up and write this part. And we figured out what's going on with Chris over here. And so I kept that pace for the entire semester. And then I didn't have an ending for the book. So I said to my husband, we've got to go to Madison Square Gardens. I don't know how the book ends.
So you mentioned earlier that you needed to get the ending of summer tour and that you spoke with your husband about traveling up to New York City to Madison Square Garden to see Phish for New Year's Eve. So before we get into that show, I just want to take a look at Phish in 2019 and then we'll dive right into it.
Sounds great.
In 2019, Phish played 39 shows, which is about standard for 3.0. They played 3 nights in Mexico, a 24-show summer tour, a very brief fall tour that I remember being rumored as an island tour redo. Mm-hmm. And it included shows as far west as Pittsburgh, though. They went to Charleston, and they ended with their 4-show run at Madison Square Garden. Trey played Ghosts of the Forest. He played a tour with his solo band and then a solo acoustic tour. Vita Blue released their first album in 15 years. Phish Radio debuted on Sirius XM. Between Me and My Mind debuted. The band played the Met in Philadelphia, the smallest venue they've played in years. And not to be forgotten, they played the incredible Alpine Valley Ruby Waves. And then on December 30th, the MSG Tweezer. So there was a lot going on in 2019. What was your Phish year like in 2019?
We actually went to see Trey in Dayton, Ohio, for the solo show at the Victoria Theater. And I'm excited to talk about that because I'm writing the next book to Summer Tour right now. So I just wrote about that scene because it picks up in August. Well, first of all, I was dying laughing because I'm going to tell you right now, the security, the tickets, everything was so low key that if Trey had tried to pull that like in the 90s, we would have burned that place down. I mean, like, I just couldn't. It's like all these old people going in to see Trey or whatever, and that was a moment for me. Oh my God, do you remember the Music Hall show back in the 90s in Cincinnati where they pulled the fire alarm because we were smoking so much weed and they made us evacuate the whole flipping show? Yet, like, they made us leave the venue hoping it would, like, shake loose some hippies or whatever.
Did they open the second set with Fire by Jimi Hendrix? I know that show, yeah.
I was actually there. So I've got a little story to tell you about Victoria Theater. So as I told you, I've published books, and my books of poems weave a lot of Phish and Grateful Dead and Beatles into the poetry and use them as epigraphs. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a very long, heartfelt letter to Trey Anastasio telling him about the influence he's had on my life and how important he's been to me, and, you know, how I even, you know, did labor for my son all 26 hours of Phish because I just live for Phish. So I wanted to give him my books, right? And I figured this is my only shot. I'm going to do this. We get into the venue. The show is extraordinary. And so at the very end of the show, I took a deep breath and I walked down to the end. And sure enough, Brian, they were just stairs, like just steps.
Yeah.
And, you know, the folks who were in the front row, they were like, "Hey, sister, what's going on?" And I said, "I want to give these books to Trey." And I mean, it was so homespun, right? So I have the books with the letter in it, and I've tied it with a little grosgrain ribbon. I'm standing there, and they're like, "All right, we'll help you." So he finishes the show, and he does his encore, and he gives his bows, and he's doing his, you know, how they do, they pretend like they're tired of people, whatever it is,
right?
Because they're rock stars. And so they nudged me. I don't even know these people. They're like, go now. You're going to miss your chance. So I did. I flipped and walked right up on stage. Like, I just took the steps up and just stood there. And what felt like 100 hours, you know, a few minutes went by, and I'm nervous at this point, but I stood there and I was patient. He looks over, he sees me, he breaks into that huge Trey grin.
Yep.
Walks right over to me, puts out his hand, shakes my hand. And of course I'm nervous. So I'm like, "Thank you, Trey. I just wanted to give you these. Thank you." And he was like, "Well, all right. Thank you. That's so nice. How you doing?" Da, da, da. And I was so starstruck. I now, why I would even raise an eyebrow that he has good manners. He's my age. Of course he has good manners.
Yeah.
And I'm like a middle-aged little old lady up there in my red kimono. But it was the most exciting moment ever. And then I did not take any time. I just immediately turned and walked right off. I mean, I just shook the man's hand. I didn't want to
Very
oppose.
polite of you. Very considerate.
Oh my gosh. Can you believe I did that? I was like, ah! So that was my big excitement. So that was really cool. And so then here we are, New Year's Eve. And we got up at 4:30 in the morning here in Lexington, caught that 6 a.m. flight up to New York. And
you flew the same day, huh?
Oh, yeah. So indeed,
wow.
sir. Yeah, we flew right in for that show. So it was, and we had floor seats. We went full throttle, absolutely full throttle. So it was fantastic.
And so the show opens with what I thought were kind of 3 openers in a row, right? Martian Monster, Buried Alive, and AC/DC Bag.
Yep. It was like this. I just listened to it again this morning. That Buried Alive, that's what gets me every time. It's
me too.
There's my jazz.
Right.
It's almost like they started out and they said, "Hey, Elizabeth, right on. You haven't been with us for a while. Come on, girl." It's a totally old set list. This is crazy. All right, now listen, this pan flute thing. Are you ready to move there, Brian, or am I racing on you?
Tell me, because I had no idea what was going on. I remember the Zamfir commercials. I truly do. I was very little. I must have been 4 years old when they were on, but I do remember the sound. I remember the blue background with the song titles, and the one being played was in yellow. All the others were in white. So I do have that knowledge base, but I have no idea where it fits into New Year's Eve and Fish.
Okay, well, I personally think it was just an excuse for Paige to do that. What is that from?
THX
Pixar.
sound. Yeah, I think it's the THX sound system.
Okay,
it was from the early 90s.
If you trace that through Fall, though, he had a blast with it. He did it everywhere. I personally think it was an excuse for Paige to just play that sound, because that and the tray note, right? So we hear that, and I know I'm really racing ahead, but
that's okay. We have a 3-set show.
I find that to be really interesting when Trey holds that note, and he even had us all singing it. I'm just saying there were these 2 trends that I saw, because remember now, I spent not fall tour, summer tour. I spent so much time studying every single summer show. So stream, watch, study. Every time I go for my 3 miles, I've got it in my earbud so that I'm writing that scene as if I'm right there with the kids. I needed to know and so those trends I saw with that sound from Paige and then that note from Trey, I think was that I finally got to see in real life.
And it was such a delight, even though I had no idea what was going on with the Zamfir. I loved it. And also in that set, there were some pretty big highlights. I thought that especially Haley's Comet had a really nice jam, even though in recent years, Haley's Comet has become, forgive my vocabulary choice, but kind of disposable. It was kind of like a 6-minute sing along, it's over. But this song kind of had I think it was around 8 minutes long, which is very unusual for it now. And it really caught my attention. And Wolfman's Brother as a follow-up was excellent too. But overall, I thought the first set was strong opening frame Fish.
I thought it was amazing. I thought it was way old school. I was just absolutely, when we got into Maze. Well, and that was the other thing, that Pan thing, that whole story led right into Maze. It was the perfect.
Yes. Yeah. I listened to it today. And when
Trey
Fishman starts,
and he's getting lost, and he's lost from the disco, and he's no longer there. And then, get out of this maze, and, that just, it all kind of, I don't know. I guess I just let a lot of what they do wash over me and figure I'm not smart enough the first round and I'll get it the second round. I mean,
That's been my whole relationship with Fish for however many decades it's been. And then the second set I thought was, musically speaking, the highlight of the show, because I always think that New Year's Eve kind of has this general rhythm, this general like loose itinerary where the first set is a lot of songs, a lot of good punchy songs. Second set's where the jam is. And the third set is usually dedicated to the gag, whatever the big show is.
Yeah.
And so I thought this year kind of followed that itinerary where especially Light and what was next? I think Light and Twist.
Okay, but we need to back up for a second because the story is for you about Punch You in the Eye. First of all, it's like one of my favorite Fish songs ever.
Yeah.
It's where I totally get my aggressions out. Even if I'm walking, I'm like using my arms and punching because it's just fabulous. Okay, between first set and second set, we were invited to go up and see our friends at the water wheel, but we had just gotten in that space where I just didn't want to go anywhere. Now, we're not chart people or what, it was just me and my husband, right? We're not that big of people either. We're just normal people, but we did have the garbage bag. The Fish chicks told me, bring a garbage bag and then you put your coats in them and
it's a pro move for sitting for the floor.
Yeah. So that way, when you're on the floor, you don't get everything spilled on you and you're good to go. Well, if you notice, if you walk around, you can pretty much see where people's, area or whatever was. And I went old school, right? So we're these old folks and we made friends with everybody around us immediately. So we had this great group of college guys behind us that were in the dorm together. And then this one guy who came up from Tennessee or someplace by himself, so we get to know all our people, right? So between first and second set, we're like, okay, this is just going to be our space. So we sit right down on the ground and we're hanging out and waiting. So right before they came back out, all of a sudden, this 7-foot woman and her 8-foot man came and stood right in front of me, right in front of me, right? You can tell everybody's kind of standing up and getting their places again. But we'd been there the whole first set or whatever. Yeah. And when I tell you, Brian, she was just here. So, of course, I say, could you just move over a little bit or whatever, just to the right? She goes off on me immediately. Whoa. Just starts freaking out, telling, is this your first show and you don't own this? So I use the tactic I often use where I turn back on the women and I say, you're right. I'm a bitch. So I'm going to ask you, do you want to spend second set right next to a bitch? Because I'm going to make you miserable. I am the worst person you'll ever meet. So, my heart's pounding, right? Kind of
yeah. And no one likes to do that.
Right? Not at all. And I don't want to play a mommy move, which I've used that. Listen, I paid for a babysitter, so get the hell out of my way. Kind of.
Yeah.
Your kids,
I've had to use my teacher voice sometimes.
Right?
It's not pleasant.
Right. So the funniest part about that is that was the little story I was looking for to finish my book. I needed an experience like that, and it's my character Taylor who confronts the 7-foot woman with her 8-foot man, and then between second set and third set, we're still sitting there, and our little college boys, they're like, "Hey Elizabeth, look." And I turn around and there's the woman, somebody had stamped one of those stickers in the middle of her back that said, "I chomp,"
perfect. It's just desserts.
So that was kind of funny.
She's got a little scarlet A on her back.
Yes, just a little. I did not put that there. I did not come with stickers, Brian. I promise you.
The universe came to your aid.
Indeed. All right, so now we've got to get into the best. I personally think the clones were the best part.
What were your thoughts in between the set? Did you notice that in between the second and third set, all of the songs were about colors?
Not at all. That went completely over my head. I missed every single clue.
Yeah,
so cool.
There were all the songs in between were about colors. And then I was with a new group of friends, a friend who I met earlier that year. But anyway, this guy and I made plans to sit together on New Year's. And we were talking about, maybe it's a Casvat Vox sequel or a whole Zamfir set or something about colors. And the only thing that we could come back to is if we could guess it, they're not doing it.
Right. I can't believe you guys saw the color thing. Did you not? I didn't even notice that the balloons were clearly green, yellow, blue, and like went right over.
We didn't see anything. All the songs that were playing over the PA, the set break music, had colors in the title, like Crimson and Clover by Tommy James, for example.
Are you kidding me? I must follow this.
I don't remember more examples, but every song either had a color in its title or in its chorus.
Brian, I have a lesson plan on the philosophy of aesthetics, about how there's a disconnect in the relationship between the artist's intention, what's actually created, and the audience's response.
Yep.
And I do it through using Gayut. So I read to the children a story called Once Upon an Ordinary School Day. And it models, so it's a little children's book, and when I read it aloud to them to model what I want them to do, and I turn on the music, and they have all their paper and their color pencils, and I say, draw, write, scribble, doodle, anything that comes to mind as you hear this music. And then and I use the Vermont Youth Orchestra.
Oh, I love that version.
Because then the children really love when they learn that those were kids their age making that music. So when we get to the end of it, I ask them, well, what did you see? What did you hear? And they tell all the stories. And I'm like, oh, so how many of you wrote about an ugly pig? You know, and so then I pass out the lyrics, 0. I pass out the lyrics, and then I pull up the rock version, and, you know, and I show them a little, you know, here's Gayut, same song. And I think that when we see Trey operating as such and using all of his skill set, so from being a rock and roll guy to Frank Zappa, Les Claypool, you know, cerebral, to the jazz, now bringing in the Broadway influences. And the reason I say that is what I really heard was he's using vocals now as instruments almost.
Absolutely.
I'm not a musician, so I'm having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to explain. But for example, in Drift While You're Sleeping, the kids aren't just going, la, la, la. The best line is, we don't need no ride, so step aside. Step aside, we don't need no ride. I burst out laughing. I was like, that is hilarious. It is so cute. It's so funny. I don't think Trey would have ever composed something like that 20 years ago.
It's funny because I've had an even number of guests at this point, and half of them have chosen 3.0 shows and half of them have chosen 1.0 shows. And I think prevailing idea is, Fish now, or Trey especially now, can't play like he used to. And my thing is, well, you got to think about it in the reverse, or, you know, in the converse, where there are ways of playing now and jams that they're playing now that Fish in 1994, for as impressive and virtuosic as they were, they could never structure a jam, even like Twist that's in this show, for example. it's so patient and mature, and it utilizes so many different aspects of musicality and rhythm and harmony and I don't even know if I'm using, I might sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't.
Absolutely. In that documentary, I loved when Trey and Paige were talking about layering. How they really pulled away. When they were first starting out, it was just the 4 instruments, period.
Right.
And now that they're actually using all of the layering and figuring out and really exploring with how it can make that sound even larger and fuller and more mature and have more depth to it, for sure.
And they're experts at it.
They are. So what's the use? We always say that Chris Caruta is the 5th band member. I don't think he's ever had a solo. That was his first solo as far as I'm concerned. Well, that was extraordinary.
It's funny you bring up Caruta, because it occurred to me during the third set that not only were the 4 band members being cloned by their dancers and the backup singers, but since the band was being lifted all the way up to the top of the stage, I thought they were cloning the light show. Because
absolutely.
If you watch the video,
that's really good. Yeah.
If you watch the video, Caruta only uses those 4 colors. At all. Maybe until the very end, he throws in his normal rig, but it's all those base colors, and the band is the lights, and the band, the dancers are the band beneath.
Yes, exactly. And I thought putting "What's the Use" against Drift was brilliant.
It really was.
Drift can be so. I love it. It's my song of the moment, but that would make sense that it is from my age and who I am and what have you. I could see younger people being a little more impatient. So you put that melancholy minor key. I know that there were a lot of people crying, not just me. It was that beautiful.
And with What's the Use, I think what the band has done, especially in more recent years, is they've kind of made that silence beautiful. Because about 2.5 minutes in this version, and I've seen What's the Use a number of times, everyone drops out except Trey, and he's barely playing. It's so delicate and soft. And at a place like Madison Square Garden, which can be louder than any other venue, for their deafening silence, for this one small gentle riff or this gentle melody that then comes down, with everyone joins back in, it really took my breath away. And it still does when I listen back.
It's my 2 favorites, starred, listened to on a weekly basis. I can't get enough still too. That's the beauty of the kind of music that we listen to. Yeah. Is you have opportunity to really get into it and look at it and listen to it for different reasons. Even especially with the Grateful Dead, my relationship with them. On Sunday, my friend came over and we did the Days Between by sitting on the patio or sitting down at the pond and just relaxing, and pulled up the radio, Grateful Dead, and just lucked out. And she said, "What is this, Jerry?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've never heard it before." How amazing is that, right? And I've never heard it before. Come on.
Yeah. And with both bands, that's the thing. Their catalogs are so tremendous. Their live archives are almost incomprehensible in terms of just sheer volume. But even the ones that you do know, your favorite show, your favorite shows, there's so much musicality going on in both Phish and the Grateful Dead that it's so dense, it rewards so many repeat listenings.
So what's your analysis of the sand trend all of summer and fall and winter?
That they just continue to play sand? What do you mean?
Yeah, you see it in fish, you see it in tab. I haven't done the stats or anything. I don't do any. Does Fantasy Tour even exist anywhere? That that thing where they did all the stats.
I haven't gone on to Fantasy Tour, but Fish.net does stats. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah, I cite them in my book. I should know that. I know that for the record. But no, I haven't done the stats. It just seems like, I got my sand at, Madison Square Garden. I got my sand with Trey Anastasia Band at Bourbon and Beyond. I'm not complaining, but has it always been that way? Is it a song that he's just stuck on?
Off the top of my head, my guess is that sand is what Elisa Alishant from Fish Radio describes as an activation song, where it's a song that's kind of giving you a message that you can use or a theory and act upon. And Tom Marshall wrote the lyrics, of course. It's, that if you try to just treat symptoms, right? If you just kind of skirt around the edges of problems, you're never going to get anywhere. It's like grasping sand, right? It's never going to be satisfying enough, and you're never going to solve anything. And I think that kind of message kind of goes in line with his more recent output, like Everything's Right or Rise, right. Come Together, those sort of message songs that there is positivity ahead of you, but it just won't come to you. You have to step toward it. Like Light, it says obstacles are stepping stones. You can't just lay it down and have it come to you. I think Sand is kind of a proto version of that because it was written in 1999. That's what resonates with Trey, I think. Aside all that, it's a fun song to dance to.
Well, it is. I mean, it's a great song. I'm not complaining. I was just curious what the,
it's my guess.
Yeah, cool. So the advent of what's happened in the world with all of this, that we can have this conversation. Where are you, in New York or whatever?
Yes,
Kentucky,
I'm in New York City.
How fantastic is that? And we're talking about a band that we love. And I just didn't know at all. I had absolutely no inclination whatsoever when I came back from New Year's Eve. And, we go back to school in January. Life is quiet. I'm finishing the novel by waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and finishing and getting ready to send out the query letters to get a literary agent. I had no idea that was going to be an end of an era. I wanted the book to read like a fairy tale, so I drop a lot of breadcrumbs in the beginning that are fish details that we would see, but it wouldn't distract the other readers.
Yeah, there's a Susie Greenberg quote in the very beginning.
Right. Yeah. Things like that you make your ears perk up. I wanted it to have that, idyllic paradise, world, because when I ran around with the Grateful Dead in the 80s and everything, that was so healing to my life journey. It was a second childhood. I trusted Jerry Garcia completely. Like, no matter what other shit would happen during the day when we were on the lot, once you got into the show, you could just put your trust in Jerry, and you knew you were going to be there. And it was this very spiritual, transformative, thing that Peter Connors captures in Growing Up Dead that I wanted to capture with Fish. I wanted to celebrate the band. I wanted to celebrate the entire world of it. The book I'm writing now is the next part. It's Paradise Lost. Yes.
Oh, I took a whole class on that in college.
I'm going to call you then, Brian.
Call my professor. Don't call me.
I'm taking John Milton's title because I like Summer Tour and Paradise Lost juxtaposing.
Yeah, that works.
What happened was, I as I said, in January, February, I'm querying, trying to get a literary agent, and like all writers, you don't stop. You pick up the next manuscript and you start writing.
Yeah.
So I'm writing this time around about the same 4 kids: Claire, Chris, Alex, and Taylor. It's August. They're seniors in high school. And I'm wandering around like an idiot, about 17,000 words into it. Like, what the hell is, we're not on tour. They're not going to Mexico. They're too young for that. It's their senior year. What am I writing about? Boom, the pandemic happens.
Yeah.
I've got a manuscript about 4 seniors in high school. No prom, no graduation, Black Lives Matter, all of these. So I wanted to really juxtapose, and, it just happened again, the alchemy of Fish. When you dare make art, magical things happen.
And, and there's so much that's so rich. That's such a fertile backdrop to write about, with especially in that age group, like seniors and, I teach middle schoolers, but still it's like this hyper connectivity that they have with TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat, where they put something out there and within seconds they get feedback, even if it's just a like on their post, it's automatic. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think a lot of people our age just kind of overlook when you complain about social media. It's like, they're wasting their time with pictures and taking pictures of their food. There's more to it than that. And so if you dig into it, we're at a time now when lots of us are actually pretty isolated, except for being online or our digital selves. There's a lot there that we could learn, in a sense, from people, natives who are more experts at using social media. And I think that would fit very well into a spiritual sequel or an actual sequel. I don't know.
When I started my huge inquiry into Paradise Lost, because I took John Milton to graduate from the University of Cincinnati with my BA in English. So it was every poem except for Paradise Lost, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 a.m. in the winter. Like,
jeez.
It was horrible. It's not a Christian story. So I guess I just like that, so it's a working title or what have you. But
yeah.
So these weird things. I write that Sam's dad went to China, of all places, 6 or 7 years ago, like that. And I can't change that. It's in the book.
It's out.
Right. So, and like, I thought that was strange. And then, did you remember at Dick's in the summer last year? Do you remember what everybody was upset about?
The vermin, the plague?
The plague, the prairie dog plague. So as I'm laying these scenes, gearing up for the pandemic, right? So the kids are getting together to stream Dick's. Did you hear that? He said, flee. That's because of the pandemic. Da, da, ha, ha, ha. And I have one of the kids say, there's no plague that would ever stop fish tour.
You got to cross your fingers, right? You got to have hope. If it's not going to, there's, that's too crushing for me to take right now. I can't imagine
it will happen. It will. Absolutely. It will happen. I'm just saying that the older I'm getting, when something like this happens, I keep telling my son who's 19, I don't know the answers, buddy, because my mom didn't deal with this and my grandmother didn't deal with this.
Yeah.
And I knew when to take the pacifier away. I knew when to make him recognize his numbers. I knew when to make him do his own science project. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing right now.
Yeah, nobody does.
Yeah. So, I have appreciated so much the music that our Tuesdays, dinner and a movie.
Yeah, I'm excited for it this week.
Absolutely. It keeps us going. And, Trey's just on fire. That's basically what it comes down to. The man's got it going on. He's healthy and he's just pouring. The creativity is just pouring out of him everywhere he turns with everything. It goes to the forest and his solo and Trey and Anastasia and Oysterhead and fish and blah, blah. It just never stops.
Yeah.
What an amazing time to be a fan.
Before we wrap this up, where can people find Summer Tour? Right
now on Amazon, and that's my best chance of getting a literary agent. I hate to make it sound like that. I self-published. Mm-hmm. I didn't get, my queries, I didn't get an agent. I guess not a lot of agents like fish. Imagine that.
We're everywhere.
I thought so. But listen, if this had not happened, I'd still be queering.
Yeah, of course.
I would not have been in a hurry. But when it became really obvious that we weren't going to have any tour, I thought, I've got this book, it could make people smile. So I self-published, and you do that through KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they did a very pretty job, and I have all creative control, which is wonderful. I'm hoping that the energy from this book will help me continue with my path as a writer, and we'll have our next conversation that I got an agent and sold the next book, and everybody can get them at the independent bookstores like they like.
All 5 that are still left. We'll pick it up at City Lights in San Francisco.
Oh, dare dream. Dare dream. Oh my gosh, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here.
Thank you, Brian. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. And everyone, take a look on Amazon, search Summer Tour or Elizabeth Beck. You'll know the cover when you see it. It's a cover explicitly made for readers or anyone who's into fish. You'll know which one it is. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Elizabeth Beck for joining us today, and now it's time for the fact check. So in the beginning of this conversation, Elizabeth mentioned that her first Phish show was in 1992 at Bogart's in Cincinnati. Phish played Bogart's twice in 1992, on December 3rd and on May 5th. Elizabeth did not clarify which one it was, but both of those shows, at least according to the set list, sure look like they're worth checking out. She also mentioned a show in Cincinnati when someone pulled a fire alarm because the crowd was smoking too much weed. That show was on June 21st, 1994 at the Cincinnati Music Hall. The band got through 5 songs before the fire alarm went off. Everyone had to evacuate, and they came back for an extended second set, which indeed did start with Fire by Jimi Hendrix. Video of that show is available on YouTube. When talking about Halley's Comet, I mistakenly said that Wolfman's Brother was a great follow-up. However, Halley's Comet was played in the first set and Wolfman's Brother was played in the second, so I mixed up the order of the set list. I also suggested that Halley's Comet was about 8 minutes long on this night. It was actually closer to 12 minutes, and a very highly recommended version at that. When discussing What's the Use, Elizabeth says that she doesn't think that Chris Karuta has ever had a light solo. In fact, CK5 actually did take a light solo on his birthday at a show on July 25th, 1999 at Deer Creek. I could not find any video of it on YouTube, but on the audience recording, the crowd goes nuts for CK5's light solo. Again, the name of the book is Summer Tour, written by Elizabeth Beck. You could find it on Amazon. And thank you so much to Elizabeth for joining us today on Attendance Bias. I am Brian Weinstein. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.